Whoever sends texts on their phone, you ever text? Let me do it a different way. Raise your hand. We're going to find out something about some of you. Who never sends text or uses text messaging on your phone? You never text. Never. Okay, so one guy, and his name is Guy. So most of us use this to text. We use it to telephone people, of course, and in a variety of other things. But texting has become a way of life. Now, when I was young, and perhaps some of you can remember this as well, and notes were a common thing in school, and not notes that you wrote for your teacher, but you would pass notes to friends. I was not a big note writer. Sometimes I would get notes, like from girls who were speaking on behalf of some other girl, to ask me a question. And I discovered somewhere along the way that there would be abbreviations for certain things. And I also discovered I was not in the know on some of those abbreviations. What does this mean? I didn't have to ask around. So I'm going to give you a few abbreviations and see if you can just tell me what these mean. Some are older, some are used probably regularly by a few of you. So I'll start with 3-letter abbreviations. IDK. I don't know. BRB. You guys are good. OMW. On my way. How come it's all over here and this side's silent? What's going on? FAQ. Frequently asked questions. GTG. Gotta go. And so this one I've seen in text messages at times, and then some people start putting emojis with it. So I finally looked it up. What does this mean? Because I thought it was profanity at first, and then I realized, oh, well, that makes sense now, because it's not profanity. Anyway, SMH, shaking my head. AKA, also known as. Okay, now we're going to move on to 4-letter abbreviations. TTYL, talk to you later. WDYT, what do you think? Okay, now this one, hopefully there's some of the older folk know this one. I'll just read it, aside from the letters, I'll just read the word, BOGO. Buy one, get one. Okay, IMHO. IMHO. In my humble opinion. And so there's actually somebody who is here tonight who frequently says that. And then MYOB. What? Mind your own business. What? What did she say? Mind your own business. And then YOLO, also known as YOLO. You only live once. And FOMO, also known as FOMO. Fear of missing out. And so I want to talk to you tonight a little bit about the fear of missing out. What that looks like, what it means. So we're going to begin with Genesis chapter 3 tonight. Genesis chapter 3. We know the story of creation. We're familiar with the story of Adam and Eve. There's some details in chapter 3 about when the serpent shows up. He begins to talk to Eve. And I think we see this fear of missing out as early as the book of Genesis. Beginning in verse number 1, chapter 3, this is from the Voice translation. Of all the wild creatures the eternal God had created, the serpent was the craftiest. The serpent said to the woman, "Is it true that God has forbidden you to eat fruits from the trees of the garden?" And the woman responded, "No, serpent. God said we are free to eat the fruits from the trees in the garden. We are granted access to any variety and all amounts of fruit, with one exception. The fruit from the tree found in the center of the garden. God has instructed us not to eat or touch the fruit of that tree, or we would die." And the serpent replied, "Die? No, you'll not die. God is playing games with you. The truth is that God knows the day you eat the fruit from that tree, you will awaken something powerful in you and become like him, possessing knowledge of both good and evil." The woman approached the tree, eyed its fruit, and coveted its mouth-watering, wisdom-granting beauty. She plucked a fruit from the tree and ate. She then offered the fruit to her husband, who was close by, and he ate as well. And so we see in this series of verses that Eve was free. The verse says Eve was free to eat the fruit from the trees in the garden. There was no restrictions except for the one tree. And often when we're thinking about the story, we often think of the one tree because the one tree did create a problem. But how often have we considered how many other trees were actually there? How many other kinds of fruit? How much did God actually provide? Was this a massive orchard with one tree saying, don't touch that one? But then there was so much more. God had provided so much variety. His creativity is unlimited. So what did this place look like? What did this orchard look like? What did this thing we call the Garden of Eden look like? Well, the devil was masterful, the serpent was masterful in getting Eve not to focus on the much, but to focus on the one. Not to focus on the abundance, but to focus on the prohibition. Not to focus on where God said, it's all yours. It's all yours. All I'm asking is just don't touch this one. Don't eat it, don't touch it. So he, the serpent, was masterful at getting her to actually focus on the one tree, its fruit. In fact, in verse number 6, it says, she approached the tree and she eyed its fruit. So again, the serpent was very clever. The Bible already told us he was clever, very crafty. And through his persuasive words, he gets her to focus on the fruit of one tree that she was told, don't touch it, don't eat it. Remember, the serpent also said to her, God is playing games with you. So he begins this process of planting this seed of discontent in her heart. Man, there's all this. And she takes her eyes off of the much, and she begins to focus on the one thing. And he persuades her that she's missing out in some way. He persuades her that God's holding out on you. He never says, look how much he's given you. He said, this is the one thing he hasn't given you. Now, as a side note, let's make notice that he also tells her, when you eat of this fruit, something powerful is going to happen, and you'll become like God himself. But it was already said a couple chapters before that man and woman were made in the image of God, which means they were already like him. So again, here's this clever serpent just giving these words out, and with Eve not thinking too heavily about what she was already told, she's interested in having this power awaken on the inside of her, this ability to awake. I'm missing out. I've got to have whatever this tree provides. And so again, basically the serpent is telling Eve that you're missing out on something here. So say FOMO. What does FOMO mean? Fear of missing out. And I believe the fear of missing out is not just restricted to young people. I think it's something that has the potential to get all of us off track. If you have a device and you use it for anything regarding social media, then you are getting imagery of people who are doing all kinds of things. And it's not that it's a problem necessarily, but you can look at your own life. For me, when I look at stuff like that, I'm like, okay, that's cool, but whatever. Because I'm not chasing after somebody else's dream. But certainly, I would venture to guess if I was younger, as in much younger, as in a teenager, I'd see that, and I'd have this idea that, man, there are people going to these parties every weekend, there are people going to these games every weekend, there are people going to these restaurants every weekend, people going to these amusement parks every weekend, people going to the beach every weekend, and here I am just sitting at home. I never get to do anything. I'm the youngest of 5 children, so I would say that to my parents sometimes because it seemed like my older siblings got to do everything, and I never got to do anything, but probably that was partly because of age. I wasn't at an age to do certain things. You know, you cannot go drive the car. You're only 4 years old. But then that would be a complaint of mine at times. I never get to do anything. And fearful that I perhaps not fearful, but just concerned that I'm missing out on something. Driving, I don't know that I felt like I was missing out on something before I drive, but certainly getting your license and being able to drive was a big deal. My family only had one car, so if I ever got to drive the car, that was a big deal. But I tease some young people in classes that I teach because they get their license, they have a car, they're so excited. And sometimes I tell them, well, so do your parents ever ask you to, hey, on your way home from school, stop and pick up some toilet paper, a gallon of milk? Right, driving was so exciting until you actually had to do something besides just have fun driving. Adult life. I say this to young people all the time. I can't wait to be 18. You say that now because you've never been to the other side of 18. See, when you're on the lower side of 18, it looks glamorous. I'm my own man. I make my own rules. I get up when I want. I go to bed when I want. Nobody tells me what to do. And then we cross that bridge into the realm of 18 and the adult life, and then all of a sudden, we begin taking on adult responsibilities, and one of those things is a job or school, and there's still people telling us what to do. And then in addition to telling us what to do, they want us to be somewhere at a certain time. And if we leave early, there's a penalty for that. And so we discovered that what we thought was we were missing out on, we actually aren't missing. And sometimes young people become adults, and they're like 22, 23, 24. I wish I was a kid again. Not because they don't enjoy certain aspects of adult life, but because when you're young, you realize it was much simpler. Any adults agree with that? Life was simpler when you were a kid? You just didn't know all of the stuff. You weren't aware of it all. So we have this idea then, the devil comes along, tries to convince us we're missing out on things. If you just had that car, had that girl, had that job, had that, if you could just get to this place and go to there and see those people. And so one of my new abbreviations for you, because I didn't see it anywhere else, is a DBTL. DBTL, which stands for Don't Buy the Lie. Don't buy the lie. And so the devil again said, God is playing games with you. She buys the lie. She trades the joy of her present circumstance. Come on, she's in the garden. God walks with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. It's a beautiful thing. There is no sin. The temperature must have been just right. Everything is perfect. And she trades in her condition, the very pleasant, very blessed condition she was in, for a chance at something she felt like she was missing. But again, this all started with a thought that came to her. The devil came along and said, hey, what about that tree? There's something about that tree you need to know. And he convinces her to sacrifice, to give up, to exchange the blessed life that she lived for something that turned out to be not a blessing. There's a similar story in Luke chapter 15 of the prodigal son, the story of the lost son. And the Bible says in Luke 15, verse 11, a man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. I want my share of the estate now before you die. And so his father agreed to divide his wealth between the sons. Now, the Bible is not really clear that there was a fear of missing out, but I'm going to suggest to you that perhaps there was. Why would this young man be unwilling to wait for his inheritance at the appropriate time? The Bible makes no mention of the devil coming and talking to him directly, but could it be that he's heard about the city? He's heard about places where things are happening. He's heard about Orlando, Florida, which is a haven and a paradise for young people. You can find something to do every day of the week. And so I've lived in a variety of places, nice places. I was born and raised in Southern California. I was born in Santa Barbara. If you've been there, you know Santa Barbara is a beautiful city. Then we moved farther south when I got a little bit older and lived in Orange County, California, which is another very nice area, or it used to be. We lived 7 miles from the Pacific Ocean, from Huntington Beach Pier, which if you ever watched surf championships, then you would have had to seen surf championships taking place at Huntington Beach. Then I lived in Montana. Now, Montana is beautiful. If you're from the north and you've been to those states in the summertime, they're phenomenal. Montana, what a beautiful piece of God's creation. Now, it wasn't for me because winters were long and cold. And for a kid from Southern California, Montana cold is something I didn't want to deal with. But I lived there for 2 years. But beautiful, beautiful country. We lived 90 miles north of Yellowstone. And then I lived in Key West, Florida. And I hear, oh my gosh, it must be so great to live in Key West. Have you ever lived there? Because if you haven't lived there, it's going on vacation somewhere is one thing. You know why it's great to go on vacation someplace? That was so great. Because you had zero obligation. You didn't have to work. Of course, it was fun and great. But in Key West, I began my teaching career in Key West, and it was still a job. Now, for me, I'm passionate about teaching, but it was still a job. And although Key West is really nice, if you don't have a profession and you don't like the water, there ain't nothing to do. There's nothing to do. Absolutely nothing. How many times are you going to go down to Mallory Square to see the sunset? Now, I know you're going to say, I'd go every day. I doubt you would. I lived there. We didn't go to every day. And then there are things in Key West that just eyes should not behold. When the sun goes, you think Key West is weird in the daytime, go down there at night. It's really weird. And there are things that are, the only way to describe some things are just ungodly. Now, the only place I ever lived that nobody really ever wanted to come to was Oklahoma. I've never met anybody, oh, man, we're going to Oklahoma for summer vacation. Never heard anybody say that, ever. But then now I live in Naples, Florida, another really nice place. Come on, if you've been around the state of Florida, Naples is one of the nicest cities in Florida. It's different than a lot of Florida, actually. And so wherever I've been, I've had people say, oh, man, I can't wait to get out of here. Young people especially. Naples, I can't wait to get out of Naples. There's nothing to do. Living in Key West. I can't wait to get out of this place. It's horrible. Live in Southern California. Come on. We just came from a place where they were advertising this Bible, not this Bible school, but this school, a Christian school. And they were just saying all the things that it has in California. You're this close to Hollywood, this close to the beach, this close to the mountains, this close. Man, you're right there in Southern California. Come out to this Bible school. Or whatever it was. Why? Because there's an attraction for all of that. Even when I lived there, man, I can't wait to get out of this place. I hate California. And so the devil's always going to suggest to us there's some other place that's just so much better than where we are. And sometimes when you get to those places, it wasn't the place, it was you the whole time that was the problem. As someone said, remember this, wherever you go, there you are. Somebody told me a story many years ago, a man driving up to a small town. He is moving his family into this small town. There's a guy sitting, I don't know, on his porch. And the man pulls up in his car and says, hey, what's this town like? And so the old man sitting on the porch said, well, what's it like where you're from? He said, oh, man, it's a phenomenal place. People are great. Really nice community, blah, 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 blah. Just he had glowing things to say about his former home. The man said, you're probably going to find this the same way. He said another time then, and the man pulls up in the car, similar situation. He's going to move to this town. Hey, what's this town like anyway? He said, man, what was the town like where you came from? He said, man, just people just hate each other. A lot of tension, a lot of anger in the town. Da, da, da. He said, we're probably going to find this the same way. Why? Because wherever you go, there you are. Sometimes the problem is not our location, it's something on the inside of us. And I've discovered that because I've lived so many places. It's not the place. It might be me. All right, so we have the situation where the prodigal wants his share. He wants to move on. He's heard about Hollywood. Who's ever been to Hollywood? Who's ever been to Hollywood at 3 a.m. in the morning? 3 a.m. Anybody? 2 a.m. down the Sunset Strip? Anybody? Nobody. I'm going to tell you, Hollywood is like Key West at night. You wait till the sun goes down, you go out there on the strip at night, strange things happen. Peculiar people are out on the street. And so this young man, he's thinking, man, I want to go where the lights are bright. And so verse 13 says, a few days later, this younger son packed up all his belongings, moved to a distant land. It's got to be better there. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. Woo! Party every day. Party like a rock star. Right? Wild living. He was a wild man going crazy in this far land. This is what I've always dreamed of. Thanks, Dad, for giving me the inheritance before my time. This is incredible. If you read further on the story, it tells more specifically some of the things he got involved in, and they're not pretty. They're sinful behaviors. Extremely sinful behaviors. But it says about this time, everything's going well, he's partying like a rock star, the money goes dry, he runs out. And then there's famine in the land as well. And he begins to starve. Man, party like a rock star is not happening anymore. It's all fun and games until it's not. And so he said he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. And the young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. But no one gave him anything. So we have a situation again where there's a potential fear of missing out. There's something more out there for me. And so the son exchanges his present condition, his present circumstance, for a chance at what he was missing. In the story of Adam and Eve and in the story of the prodigal son, we see that a seed of discontent led to the fear of missing out, and the results speak for themselves. In both situations, they were tragic outcomes. So we need to be aware before, like they say, look before you leap. You shouldn't just rush headlong into something because it looks good. It might be the very thing that leads to your demise. And so it's time for us to begin turning around our thinking and from FOMO to JOMO. So there's another one, JOMO, for you. So what's JOMO? The joy of missing out. The joy of missing out. And so we just have a place where we understand, man, there's to be a joy sometimes in missing out on certain things. A joy in missing out on certain things. For instance, the time many years ago I had some students, went out joyriding. When you're joyriding, you're careless. When you're careless, things happen. They veered across the traffic, went into some other vehicles. Nobody died, but one of my students, when he finally came back to school, he was disfigured for life. His face was disfigured. I believe he had a limp after that as well. All because of just feeling like maybe we can just go out and have some fun tonight. Let's go out and get crazy. And so when he came back to school finally and we talked a little bit, there was definitely regret. But he knew this face that was severely disfigured at that point. This was it for the rest of his life. This is how he's going to look. I'm reminded of a time here in this town many years ago. There was a party, Christmas party, in a local apartment complex here in Naples. And I don't know, it was wrong place, wrong time, right place, wrong time, whatever, but one of my students in that situation went to the party, somebody pulled a gun, shot, and killed him. I'm going to miss the party. I think I'd be joyful that I did miss out on that experience. I think I'd be joyful that I missed out on joyriding that ended in tragedy. I think I'd be joyful that I missed out on another situation. This is another school district as well, but a young man, I think he was 14 years old. This was back when huffing was popular, if you remember what huffing was. You essentially get chemicals into a rag and you inhale the chemicals. So this young boy, 14 years old, was convinced by his friend, come on, it's going to be great. And so he decides to, get involved and do the huffing. And he went into cardiac arrest and died. First time, and that's it. Now, all three stories I just told you, they're all true. They're all true. And so we should have a sense that, now people are like, aren't you a risk taker? No. People say, don't you like going fast? Well, do I like the sensation of going fast? Absolutely. But I'm thinking lots of things. If I'm ever on the freeway or a street where traffic's zooming by me, I'm thinking if I'm going, 90 on the highway, if I'm going down Alligator Alley over to Miami 120, because you can, I'm thinking lots of things. What if my tire blows out? Well, what if somebody else who's going 60 decides to change lanes in front of me and I'm going 120? What if one of those moments when a rabbit runs in front of you? Because most of us jerk our wheels. Poor little rabbit. It's either me or the rabbit. I've discovered the rabbit's got to go. But I'm not driving 120 miles an hour. I'm thinking of all the things that can go wrong. People say, let's go bungee jumping. I said, no, thank you. You chicken? And not so much chicken. I'm thinking, because I've seen some of those things on television. Those things snap sometimes. This could be the time. Woo! Snap. I don't want to be that guy. Or they miscalculate, right? Say they bungee jump over these alligators. How cool. They miscalculated the link and it goes a little too long. I don't want that thing grabbing a hold of me. So for me, there's a joy sometimes in missing out. I don't need all that. I can get by without that. And so we need to assess our lives, assess things in our lives, and decide, am I pursuing this because I'm fearful of missing out, or is there a legitimate reason I'm pursuing this thing? And then at other times, being joyful. I'm joyful that I am missing out on certain things. I've never been somebody to drink alcohol. I've never been somebody to hang out at bars. I've never been somebody who looks for chicks to pick up. I've never been somebody who's been into drugs. I've never been somebody to a lot of those things. I've just never been that guy. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not like I have never had a thought. I wonder if that's cool. I wonder if that's actually fun, because everybody says it is. But I've avoided those things, and I have to say that my life has been better for avoiding them. And since I've become a Christian, I've discovered that God's plan is for me to avoid those things too. So where I was ignorantly avoiding them at one point, just naturally avoiding them, I see that God has a plan for me, and that plan is to avoid those things too. Those things are going to suck the life out of me. Those things are going to endanger me. Those things are going to cause me not to have a witness for Christ. Those things that are going to cause me to not fall under the blessings of God, but under condemnation and guilt and potential injury and harm and possibly death. And so say JOMO. Come on, JOMO is the joy of missing out. We should find joy in missing out on certain things. We'll go really quickly here, yes. So next, CYF, change your focus. Change your focus. Instead of looking at all the things you don't have, maybe you should begin to look at all the things you do have. Instead of Eve looking at all the things she had, she looked at the one thing she didn't have. And it changed her life. It changed Adam's life, and it changed the course of mankind. And so change your focus. Colossians 3, verses 1 and 2 says, set your sights on the realities of heaven, where Christ sits in the place of honor at God's right hand. Set your sights on the realities of heaven. Think about the things of heaven, not the things of earth. And so some of the things I mentioned earlier, those are natural, fleshly, earthly things, which tend to get people in trouble and tend to cause harm and injury. And some of these things have long-term consequences, and some lead to death. But the Bible says that Christ came to give us life, and life and death are not even near each other. Anything that's not contributing to life is bringing death. I'll say it again. Anything that's not contributing to your life then must be producing death in your life. because there are only two possibilities here. And then finally, GTTG. GTTG. Give thanks to God. Give thanks to God. Again, we're not talking about focusing on what we're missing out on, but giving thanks to God for what we have, for the blessings He's bestowed upon us, for the good things that we are enjoying in life. Anybody ever read the book Pollyanna? Pollyanna, any readers in here read Pollyanna? There's one, two, okay, so a couple of you. So Pollyanna is a 1913 novel by American author Eleanor Porter. The main character was a little girl, 11 years old, named Pollyanna Whittier, who was an orphan, and she came to live with her Aunt Polly. And if you've read the book or if you've seen any of the movies, they usually reference this particular thing, but circumstances in her life, because she was the daughter of a missionary, were such that her father taught her to try how to cope with certain things in life, and she had this thing she called the glad game. And the game consists of finding something to be glad about in every situation, no matter how bleak it may be. It originated in an incident one Christmas when Pollyanna, who was hoping for a doll in the missionary barrel, found only a pair of crutches. And making the game up on the spot, Pollyanna's father taught her to look for the good things, the good side of things. In this case, to be glad about the crutches because she did not need to use them. You say, well, why would I do that? Because we're talking about looking for the blessing, looking for the positive, looking for the upside instead of always looking for the negative. Listen, you'll always find a negative something. You will. If you look hard enough, you'll find something negative. Look at yourself in the mirror long enough, you'll find something about your face that you believe is flawed. So stop looking at yourself so much. 1 Thessalonians 5:18 says, be thankful in all circumstances. And so GTTG, give thanks to God, be thankful in all circumstances. And then in the verse on the top there says, for this is the will of God for you. God's will for you and me is that we're thankful. Not whining and complaining about what we don't have, but grateful, thankful for what we do have. I could cite some things in life that I don't have right now. And I could get discouraged. I can get depressed. So it's better for me to focus on what I do have. If I don't have a car in my home, I have a bicycle. Some people say, well, it's hot in Florida, ride a bicycle. I have a bicycle. It's a mode of transportation. Thank God for the bicycle. And the way the weather's been going the last few weeks, man, thank God for air conditioning. Electricity is so high. We'll have to turn it off. you have an alternative. But if you can afford to have the air on at all, you would appreciate the comfort it provides. And so again, we're going to stop focusing on what we lack. We're going to start thanking the Lord for what He has given us. And there's a song many years ago by a group named Petra. Anybody ever heard of the band named Petra? Yeah, so they had a song called Thankful Heart. And the lyrics are, I have a thankful heart that you have given me, and it can only come from you. There is no way to begin to tell you how I feel. There are no words to express how you've become so real. Jesus, you've given me so much I can't repay. But I have a thankful heart. And to have a thankful, the band, go ahead and come up. Whoever's doing music tonight, come on up. So, man, we can have a thankful heart, a grateful heart. And instead of looking on our devices and scrolling through things and seeing what other people are doing, which may just be manufactured, incidentally, you would do well just to say, you know what, I'm content with who I am and where I am. Paul the Apostle said, I've learned in all things to be content. When I have much and I have little, I've learned to be content. I've learned. He didn't say it came packaged as ways that I've learned to be content. And so we can learn to be content as well, not longing after what everyone else has, allowing God to open doors of opportunity for us, allowing God to direct our paths, allowing God to show us His plan and purpose for us, and allowing Him to convince us in our hearts to have that conviction that what He's called us to, He'll equip us to do as well. God doesn't call you and then put you in a position where you lack. He calls you and then he equips. And the last thing I'll say is this. When I moved here to Florida, to Naples, Florida anyway, Key West is expensive. Naples is really expensive. When I first moved here, I thought, so I came down to my paperwork for my job. I went back to where I was. I said, Debbie, every car is like a BMW and a Mercedes. Crazy. I didn't cry, but I was like, Debbie, it's crazy. How am I going to afford to live here? How are we going to afford to live here? And without going into all the details, I will merely say this, that God had provision for me because he called me here. And what I was focusing on was that one thing I didn't have instead of looking at the provision that God had. And so it's time we begin to look at the provision that God has for us. Come on, God loves you, church. God loves each and every one of you. And his thoughts about you are good. His desires for you are good. His provision for you is abundant. And his ability to get things to you, though they may be deterred by the enemy, they won't be stopped.